How do you sort out the so-called jargon from real-world practices that work? Do the members of your organization find some business or technology advice utterly confusing? Welcome to Real Talk with Sam Holcman. In this program, we set the record straight, and in terms that business people and technology people can understand. Now, here is your host, Sam Holcman.
Welcome to this edition of Real Talk. I'm Sam Holcman. Thanks for joining me on this particular broadcast. And this broadcast is around a topic that we thought had faded away completely, but it hasn't. And it has to do with doing architectural principles. Most enterprise architecture principles sound good, but do not change a single decision because they are not testable. To make them real, you need to convert each principle into a SMART, S-M-A-R-T goal, plus one or three hard metrics. For example, instead of saying reuse before buy or buy before build, commit to the following. By the first quarter of 2027, increase the percentage of new solutions needs met by existing approved platforms from 25% to 60%, cutting application run costs by 15% and time to market by 20%. Now you can wire that into governance, architecture reviews, portfolio decisions, roadmaps, and report progressively quarterly. At that point, it stops being a poster on the wall and becomes a scoreboard the business can hold EA accountable to. So this concept of principles became popular in a wave in the 1980s. And that's why we're surprised that it's raised its head again. And it disappeared almost completely in the year 2000 or so. So 20-some years ago. But some people are still talking about it, I guess. And so we want to clear things up for you and possibly set you on a pathway that is actually usable. And they've been quietly fading all this time. So just a little historical perspective. When did EA principles arise? Well, it was late 1980s to the 1990s. Early enterprise architecture frameworks and later TOGAF put explicit architectural principles in the front of a process, often as a phase focused on defining principles before doing anything else. 2000 to the early 2010s, many organizations formalized EA principles into catalogs, 10 to 20 statements like reuse before build, one source of the truth, buy not build, as standard EA deliverables. Now, how and when did they fade? Let's go to mid-2010s and onward. Product-centric ways of working pushed EA to prove value through speed, customer impact, and cost outcomes, rather than through adherence to static principle lists. The 2020s, modern EA writing and tools emphasized strategy execution, metrics, and roadmaps over long principle catalogs. Enterprise architecture principles, as usually practiced, are mostly cosmetics, as they are vague, unmeasurable slogans that never constrain a decision or tie to outcomes. What is required in their place is a small set of explicit goals with clear measures that directly link architecture work to business movement. Why principles became cosmetic. When EA principles are handled like posters or slideware, they fail in predictable ways. They are written as generic platitudes. Maximize benefit to the enterprise. Align with business objectives. Or business value-driven architecture. They sound good, but mean everything and nothing at the same time if they are not tied to a specific numeric target, time frame, or owner. They never actually kill or change a decision. If no project is ever stopped, redesigned, or prioritized differently because that would violate our principles, then the principles are not governing anything. They're decoration around decisions made for other reasons. They do not show up in measurement or incentives. Organizations commonly maintain pages of architectural principles, but measure architects on documentation production, standards compliance, and tool population instead of impact on cost, speed, risk, and customer outcomes. In that mode, EA principles serve mainly as a legitimization, costume. They make the architecture function look serious and thoughtful without creating any real accountability for value. What explicit goals with measures look like, rather than principles? Replacing cosmetic principles means starting with a small number of sharp outcome-driven goals and attaching concrete metrics to each one. Define outcomes before rules. Instead of standardization and interoperability, define reduce application portfolio by 25% in 3 years, while improving time to market for new products by 20%. Then derive standards, patterns, and decisions that actually deliver on those numbers. Separate outputs from outcomes. This is very, very important. What are outputs? Roadmaps, standards, capability maps, reference models, governance forums. What are outcomes? Fewer duplicate systems, faster integration cycles, lower run costs, improved customer satisfaction, higher change success rates. Both should be explicit, but outcomes are what justify EA. Attach clear indicators and review cycles. Customer financial growth and process metrics, for example, integration lead times, reuse rate, portfolio complexity reductions, CapEx, OpEx impact, regulatory incidents. Provide a scoreboard that can be reviewed quarterly and recalibrated as strategy changes. This converts EA from we believe in good architecture to we are accountable for those movements in the enterprise, and here's how architecture is moving those needles. Now, how architecture practice changes when you do this. Once explicit goals with measures are in place, everything else in the EA practice has to realign. Strategy to execution traceability. Goals and strategies at the CEO level are decomposed into organizational and individual goals with architectural artifacts, goals, process, data, organizations, locations, and events, all arranged so that every model and decision can be traced back to those top-level goals. You get direction, not documentation. Frameworks and models become means to an end. They exist only to help decide what to change, when, and in what order. To hit the agreed goals, not to achieve metal model completeness. Competence measures in practice, not recall. Demonstrated practice approaches to EA, for example, EA 5.0 from the Enterprise Architecture Center of Excellence, explicitly tie certification and coaching to the ability to produce consumable artifacts that change decisions and outcomes, rather than the ability to pass multiple choice exams and tests about principles and frameworks. Regurgitation and replication is very different than producing usable outcomes. In a world, principles can still exist, but they are distilled from the goals and metrics, not invented as free-floating statements. The center of gravity moves from what we believe to what we are trying to achieve. How will we know, and how does architecture get us there? Now, let's take a look here. How do we convert an EA principle into a SMART goal and metric? As an example, convert the principle into a decision so you can score it by forcing it through the SMART pattern and binding it to one or more concrete EA metrics. Step 1. Start from a typical principle. Grab one. Example, reuse before buy before build. On its own, can't be measured, and it actually won't change behavior. So let's make it SMART. Turn the principle into a SMART template based on the following. SMART. Specific. What behavior and scope? Here's an example. Increase reuse of existing approved solutions for enterprise applications. Measurable. That's an indicator or threshold. Achieve at least 60% of new solutions needs met by reuse. Achievable or actionable. Grounded in current baseline and capacity. Baseline today is 25%. We will raise to 60% via catalog and governance. Results-oriented. Tied to strategy. Cost, speed, risk, etc. Support target to reduce IT run costs by 15% and simplify the portfolio. And finally, time-bound, a clear horizon. within the next 24 months with quarterly checkpoints. So what does this turn into? By quarter 4, 2027, increase the percentage of new business solution needs satisfied by reuse of approved platforms or services from 25% to 60% in order to cut application run costs by 15% and reduce time to market for new products by 20%. Step 3, attach explicit metrics. Pick 1 to 3 metrics to directly show if the goal is being met. Reuse rate metric. A definition, the percentage of new solutions needs implemented using existing approved platforms or services instead of net new solutions. What's the target? 60% by fourth quarter 2027, with interim targets per quarter. Cost impact metric. Definition, reduction in total application run costs versus baseline, usually talked about as total cost of ownership, licenses, infrastructure, support. What's our target? 15% reduction by the fourth quarter 2027. Third metric, time to market. Definition, average elapsed time for approved business case to production go live for comparable initiatives. The target, 20% improvement in the same period of time. Step 4, make it operational for decisions. To ensure this does not stay on paper, wire the SMART goal and metrics into governance. Require every architecture review to show reuse options considered and why they were accepted or rejected, and the impact on reuse rate, cost, and time to market metrics. Report the metrics quarterly to the same executives who own the business targets, not only IT. Now, the principle exists as a scorable commitment. If reuse rate, cost, and time to market are not moving toward the target, EA must change decisions, patterns, or constraints, not just update a poster. Please reach out to us at Enterprise Architecture Center of Excellence, www.eacoe.org, to help you move from platitudes of the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s to real enterprise architecture performance. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Talk. Be sure to join your host, Sam Holcman, again for another edition of our program. We'll have more real topics of discussion then.